Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is June 1st, 2023, and two big announcements to start this stream. One, happy Pride Month, and two, Cameron Jordan's absolutely roasting Atlanta Falcons all day long. My man think it's actually Thanksgiving because y'all saw it? You saw it. If you didn't, you missed a very entertaining day on Twitter today. Sadly, this is not going to be our primary thing to talk about because we actually have Saints news. I know, it's shocking. It's amazing. We are in June now and still active, updated, new Saints news. We're not recycling anything here except our intros to make the podcast longer so you think it's actually more informative than it really is. I would never do that. How y'all doing, chat? Good to see you. It's TJ, Stu, Slade, DJ, Twigger. Yeah, buddy. Yeah, I feel great about this. I feel great about you being here. Good to see James Griffon. Who dat, baby? How are you doing? Welcome in. And yes, before y'all ask, my voice is a little bit sour again. And if y'all need any life advice real quick from Rev, I'll go ahead and give it to you. If you're going to have children, please make sure you pay for health insurance because you will stay sick for probably the rest of your life. However, you'll be fulfilled, I guess, because you'll have kids. Anyway, Jimbo, Nikosi, King Arthur, Tragic, all of our friends coming in. Who dat to you? God bless. Love to see all of you. And I really do hope you're having a fantastic week as we are getting deeper and deeper into the Saints being, we're 14 weeks away from football? I mean, it's still time. I know. It makes it sound so long. But I promise it'll be here before you know it. Just wait. We're going to talk today about Jesse James. No, he is not a Wild West outlaw. He is actually a tight end who is now a member of the New Orleans Saints. He's played with, 4 teams in his career so far. Before anybody asks, do I think Jesse James is making the squad? I don't honestly know. I would lean towards no. However, we will go over the tight end room today. We're also going to at least mention, and I know we get tired of talking about Michael Thomas some, but Mickey Loomis brought up Michael Thomas to reinforce that the New Orleans Saints will have, at least they expect, to have Michael Thomas available. I mean, they say training camp, and I know there are multiples of y'all. Mostly I'm calling out TJ, but there are people out there who don't believe it's going to happen. But I'm telling you, man, I'm here to be positive. Daryl, great to see you, man. Hope you're having a great day. I just shot that link to you in the chat. He says, Deuce, if we bring in D-Hop, where does that leave Michael Thomas, A.T. Perry? Hey, y'all, they all play the X. King, we actually, and not to ignore your question, we actually spent almost the entire first half of the episode on Tuesday going over just that question. Short answer is there's no way to give all three of them a lot of snaps. The good news, I guess, is that you don't really have a need right now that you see of high expectations of A.T. Perry needing to get snaps. Like, your hope is truly that Michael Thomas is healthy and that he's playing the starter split in. So I don't think that they're going into the season looking at a 6th-round guy going, hey, we got to make sure we're getting snaps for him. But if you did bring in DeAndre Hopkins, it certainly takes away from how much you can use Michael Thomas and even vice versa if Thomas is healthy. And no, don't apologize, Arthur. I just want to make sure you know, because obviously I can't cover in depth the same topic 2 episodes in a row, but I still want to make sure you get your answer. And just letting you know, the way if you check the previous episode, we do a lot of that. And we break down, since you weren't able to tune in, which I completely get. You know, everybody can hit every episode. I get it. We really go in depth in the corner position and the wide receiver position. I think today we're going to talk a little bit about Michael Thomas. Honestly, I want to give a lot of props to Cameron Jordan today over Twitter and just salty Falcons fans, man. But I think that's actually part of the fun and the rivalry, and also just kind of go over some of the recent signings. The Jesse James thing doesn't mean anything, and we'll just see where things kind of roll out from there. Rainey, good to see you, my friend. Love you. Hope you're having a great day. So the short of it is, for those who are unaware of who Jesse James is, Jesse James joining the squad. He is a 6'7", 251-pound, several-year veteran in the league. How long has he been in the league? 8 years. He's been in the league since 2015. He is a former 5th-round pick of the Pittsburgh Steelers. His best season as a pro was in 2018 with 423 yards receiving and a couple of tutties, but he was catching about a 77% clip. So very reliable. He's never popped off and become an amazing guy, but he's definitely a traditional inline player who you can see providing, those quality snaps that maybe aren't super exciting. You know, when I say exciting, they're not one of those Jawan Johnson type of a players, but in terms of quality depth, you're looking at him being more like the Josh Hill of the NFL. I mean, we did with Cleveland last year was basically not a peer. He was in 2 games, never recorded a catch. Obviously, there are always reasons why that happens. Context is important. Year before that is with Chicago, 14 games, had 7 receptions for 62 yards. So he's not really been a consistent contributor in the league for quite some time, but there are things to be said for guys who can contribute in depth and can also provide maybe a role that you're not super confident this team having. For example, I talked about Foster Moreau when we brought him in. I like Foster Moreau. He's very willing to do anything that you ask him. But I will go ahead and say real quick and in a hurry that if you watch the film that we put out, his blocking is not amazing, particularly his run blocking. So maybe you look at a guy like Jesse James to maybe fill in a special role. Now, keep in mind that you have several names in the tight end room right now. You got Taysom Hill, you got Jawan Johnson, Foster Moreau, Jesse James now, Lucas Kroll, and Miller Forrestall. You actually have several names, and I don't see the Saints keeping all those guys. If you look at Forrestall, he's probably a name that not many people recognize. Just be real, and I'm not trying to be hateful or anything, just trying to be honest. And most of y'all probably don't know who Miller Forrestall is. He's been in the league for a couple years now. He has not registered a single catch. Most recently, he was with the Cleveland Browns, but most recently he was with Tennessee on their practice squad. But he played with Cleveland, like he was actually on the field for a couple years. And wait, hold on. I might have reversed that. I'm sorry. He might have been with Tennessee first on the practice squad, then Cleveland. But he's with New Orleans now. This is his third team either way. I know for sure it's his third team. So he's another guy that's young. He's only 25 and looking to make a roster spot, just somebody to watch in terms of the height and measures. He's 6'5", 245, very prototype in terms of the tight end position, maybe a little bit small, but there you go. So, and happy birthday, Jerry. Didn't even realize that. Shout out to Jerry. Happy birthday to you, my friend. It is a joyous day when our friends have their birthdays. Happy birthday to you, sincerely and with all love. Hope you are enjoying today. So, we got Miller Forrestall. I think most Saints fans are going to be familiar with Lucas Kroll. That's probably the one that many of you probably want to see a legit shot at making it. Now, he's 24, so he is the youngest tight end on the roster right now, and he's been with the team for 1 year. This is his second year. Now, this is not a guy that's, seeing significant playing time or anything, but he's 6'6", 260. He's got the height, the weight, the frame, and he's also one that a lot of people have really liked coming out of Pittsburgh collegiately. So you've got that, and then we got Jawan Johnson, who we expect to continue to grow. That's the hope. Johnson really popped off last year after 2 years ago transferring positions. He's 26, still got time to continue to become a better player at the position. And even though he's more of a natural flex tight end because he's a little bit undersized in terms of the strength and frame portion of being that position, he's still obviously, in my opinion, the best receiving threat that we know for sure. Now, I do want to point out, as tight ends, Foster Moreau has definitely had as much as you can in May, Foster Moreau's had a good start to New Orleans. I think part of that is probably a little bit of the rapport with Derek Carr. I think a lot of it is also just the fact that Foster Moreau is a established veteran in the league. I don't believe that Moreau is an elite tight end, but I do believe that he is a good tight end. And I think a lot of people want to root for him because he's a Louisiana boy. Not only did he go to LSU, he went to high school at Jesuit. I mean, it's really hard for me to not root from guys for the boot. And I know that's probably in the grand scheme of things not super important to a lot of people, but it is to me. So it's one of those that even though I try to be as pragmatic and, just truly be fair in being an analyst and all this stuff, there's also those stories that I just want to root for them. And Foster Moreau, even before the cancer story and overcoming cancer, I want to root for him. And then you add on the fact that, coming into his physical, they find cancer. He's working through that. It's a story that I just want to be successful. I really want Foster Moreau to have a fantastic year. For those that don't remember, Foster Moreau's best year in the league statistically was actually last year, 420 yards receiving, couple tutties, and a lot of people would also probably say that was one of the worst Raiders teams as a whole, especially defensively. So even though he's coming off his arguably best year statistically, he's not a guy that's put up, 800 yards as a tight end and gotten 7 TDs. So having realistic expectations is very important, but at the same time, 100% love the story. Want to root for him, want to be successful. Not only is he a guy from Louisiana, not only is he going through and joining this team through difficult scenarios, but just a good guy, straight good guy. So there is your room, and then of course we know Taysom Hill. I don't know how much we really need to dive into Taysom Hill, but Taysom is Taysom, and I want him to be successful. Taysom getting a little bit older now, but you still hope that he can contribute. I'm not trying to give some Rev says Taysom Hill is falling off. I will tell you that Taysom Hill is turning 33 this year. That is quite old for a NFL player. That is a little bit like it needs a caveat there because Taysom Hill did not come into the league until he was 27. So he's only got 6 NFL years in terms of contact. He doesn't really have the level of contact that most guys would have at 32. So even though he's playing a skill position, I still think Taysom probably is a good athlete for another couple years. And I'm not necessarily worried about it, but he is significantly older than most people on the team. From a football standpoint, you don't find a lot of guys in the early 30s getting close to mid-30s still playing at tight end or wide receiver or corner or safety, any of these positions where there's a lot of contact and a lot of athleticism needed to be a high-end player. And that's something that he's been able to do. So for the moment, we've still got Taysom there. So I think in terms of tight end room, just if I want to give it a realistic, hey, if I had to say this is a good group or a bad group, I'd say this is a group leaning towards good. But if nothing else, they're a better group than we've had in a few years. I think there's a little bit more consistency here. I think there's a little bit more just overall value versus some previous years that we really couldn't argue that New Orleans was just a good team in this position. I think this tight end room looks solid. And I think that's a okay way to look at it. If Juwan Johnson continued to grow, if Taysom continued to be a great playmaker, and then you get something from anybody in that room behind that, whether that is Lucas Kroll, whether it is Foster Moreau, that's a huge win for New Orleans because truthfully, this has been a group that has struggled with them over the past couple of years. And when I say struggle, let's go over the stats real quick, right? So we've got Juwan Johnson coming through. Last year, Juwan Johnson was your second leading receiver as on the team, but he had 508 receiving yards. Your third was Alvin Kamara. And that's him really that's him popping off. In terms of great tight end play, you got to go back a long time to find the New Orleans Saints really dominating as a team with a elite tight end. I mean, you go into the year before last year, go back to 2021, and I'm sure, Juwan Johnson was there. But remember, your leading tight end in 2021 was Adam Trautman with 263 yards receiving, and he was definitely not putting up a lot of tutty numbers. Go back to even the year before where you still had Jared Cook. Jared Cook was 500 yards flat as a tight end. And I know we don't want to bring up the other stuff that Jared Cook did in the playoffs, but I'm just pointing out that it's been a while since you've had a tight end room that you could really trust in, believe in, and saw as a room that was like an ascending talent. And I would actually argue that this year you have a tight end room that's finally ascending. And the best tight end room maybe is going back all the way 2018, 2019, when Jared Cook was a little bit more, I hate to use the word prime on Jared Cook. We've got a little bit of sour feelings. I understand that for Jared Cook, but maybe prime Ben Watson with Josh Hill, because I don't want to take it all the way back to Jimmy Graham, but it's been a while. So it's good to see some young guys, especially guys that you have a reason to believe that they can continue to improve, and hopefully that ends up being the case for New Orleans. King says, last thing we need, I want to get the other one real quick. Sorry, King, you got another one just because you brought up MT, and I wanted to grab it, but now I don't see the questions. No big deal. Just if we're covering injuries and stuff like that, I want to answer and go through it. Joe says, I was just thinking that we might still need a pass rusher, and Clowney came to mind. Of all the pass rushers that could and are available, that's not one that's really high on my list. I'm okay with it. I mean, I have no problem with it. If you're signing a guy in June, odds are it's a very friendly contract. It's not something that's going to hurt you as a team. Yeah, go for it. But as much as I do believe that Jadeveon Clowney is an impact player, I don't believe he's a premier impact player. So what does I mean when I say that? When I say a premier impact player, I'm saying somebody that doesn't need another guy to really shine. And I think that Clowney is the type of athlete, at least he has been in his past, where he can individually dominate, but generally when he's dominating, it's because somebody else is taking some of the flack off of him, and he's getting to be a really, really good number two. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being an elite number two. There was an elite number two, obviously Cameron Jordan for a while. His name was Junior Gillette. I know we don't really want to go into Beltman's whole story, but there are guys who are extremely talented players, but they're not good enough to be great on their own. They're good enough to be great opposite somebody else. Now, I guess you could argue, there will be, I'm sure, people who argue that his time in Houston, talking about Jadeveon Clowney, he was that guy. Like, he was that level of elite. When I look at Clowney, and I guess we'd be going back all the way to like 2017 for some of that stuff, but honestly, I'm really only familiar with Clowney for about the past 4 or 5 years. I'm not going all the way back to 2017. So if you want to argue that 2017, 2016 Clowney, when he was like second team All Pro, that he was that type of a guy, sure, that's fine. But I'm really talking about Seattle, Tennessee, Cleveland. And what he's been there is a playmaker, but not a guy who can be the guy. And all of that to say, the reason I don't really care if he comes to New Orleans is, even though I'm giving a lot of love to Cameron Jordan, I don't think Cameron Jordan at this part of his career is necessarily the guy anymore either. Do I still think that Cameron Jordan is an impact player? I do. But I just don't really see Jadeveon Clowney coming to this team and moving the needle. That's a phrase I use a lot and I like. I don't see Jadeveon Clowney, who was the first overall draft pick, coming into this team. He's 30 years old. I don't see him being that guy that just moves the needle a lot for them. And even in Cleveland, if you look at 2021, where he had 9 sacks, it was a good year for him. But honestly, why did he have 9 sacks in 2021? Because Myles Garrett is a freaking insane player. Myles Garrett is literally that type of guy that I'm talking about, that number one, that dominant individual player who just defenses build around and offenses fear. Myles Garrett was there, and Jadeveon Clowney was there. So I just don't really feel that Clowney helps too much. But if you bring him in June, I don't really care, right? It's at this point, you're bringing in quality veterans and giving them a shot to make the roster and see if they can have an impact. And that's fine. But I also think that, and please, Joseph, don't take this as a personal insult, because I'm not trying to insult anybody that's in the chat. But I also think that there's something to be said about name power, as in Jadeveon Clowney is a name people recognize. He's been in the league for years, and even to the point where you've seen highlight tapes for Jadeveon Clowney. But I just don't really feel like he provides much to New Orleans. But if he comes in, I'm not also going to fight it, because, like I said, it's June. You're trying to build the best roster possible, and veterans like that could pan out and be a win, or they could not. And if you bring in Jadeveon Clowney, the worst thing that happens is he washes out and doesn't make the team. As long as you don't sign him to like a $6, $7, $8 million contract, you're completely okay. So I'm hearing that Michael Thomas was out last year mainly due to a medical mishap of sorts. It was said that metal or some surgical pieces had to be removed from his foot. Is there any validity to this? I don't know anything about anything about that, King, so I can't really speak on it. Really can't. Really can't. So, and let's see. Who are the best free agents available right now in the NFL? Let's see. We're going to bring up a list that was posted a few days ago. And I'm just going to scan the list real quick for edge rushers, because I know Ngakoue is still available, I believe. He's still available. Clowney is available, who we just mentioned. Leonard Floyd, I think, is still available, but again, he's a 30-plus guy. Melvin Ingram is available. Again, a 30. I think he's like 35 now. He's been in the league a while. Frank Clark, another 30-plus guy. So Justin Houston, who's a million years old. Really, it comes down to, do they fit, and do you believe they can contribute going in? And, it's a little wild, I guess, to an extent, because you mentioned some of these names, and they just continue to put up good numbers. Frank Clark put up decent numbers here recently. We've got, I would say, Leonard Floyd. He had, aside from the knee injury, good run stopper, good player, still has pass rushing ability. But I think a lot of teams would rather give the younger guys a look. And then what ends up happening, at least what I think happens here, is teams like New Orleans just wait until training camp and towards the end of camp to sign these type of veterans. And you give these young guys a shot to say, hey, we deserve to be the starter. And I'm going to rattle off some names here that you're probably not going to like, but bear with me, just live with it. Y'all be okay. Carl Granderson, Isaiah Foskey, Payton Turner, Jabari Zuniga, Nico Lalos. Lalos? Lalos. How do you pronounce his last name? I don't know. You want to give these guys an opportunity to say they are or are not starter quality. Carl Granderson, look, and I know with the John Gruden stuff, the Carl Granderson stuff got brought up again. I'll be honest, I brought up the Carl Granderson stuff on Twitter. There are a lot of people who just don't like Carl Granderson because of what he's done in his life, and I think that's completely valid to be very upset with that. But at the same time, for a guy who's been 4 years in, he's earned a legitimate shot to show and have the opportunity to prove if he can be a guy, right? Payton Turner, going into his 3rd year as a first-round draft pick, you better prove you're the guy this year. And truthfully, bringing in, well, TJ, the difference is Carl Granderson's issues weren't alleged. The man served jail time. Like, they weren't alleged issues with Carl Granderson. So the Jameis thing, people bring up Jameis's allegations, but Carl Granderson went to jail. So that's why a lot of people have an issue with Carl Granderson, and I respect people having an issue with Carl Granderson. But I think if you bring in some of these 30-year-old veterans who know the game, all they're doing is limiting your ability to properly evaluate the newer guys that you have. So, cool. If you want Clowney, I've got no issue with that. If you want Frank Clark, even though I don't really see the biggest fit, I don't have an issue with that. But I do think as a team, you want to give your young guys an opportunity to try to be those guys. So, did Rev mention if he'd be okay with getting Shaq Barrett if he's a cap casualty? I mean, I'm indifferent to Shaq Barrett, just to be completely honest with you. I don't have an issue with Shaq. I just don't really see how well does he fit in New Orleans. Specifically, how well does he fit in Dennis Allen's defense? When I see Shaq Barrett, you know what I see? Now, I'm not saying I see what I'm about to say is I'm not saying I see them as equal players. I see them same position. What I see from Shaq Barrett is Caden Ellis, which is exactly what they just said. We don't need, you can walk, you can go be a starter for Atlanta. Now, I have no problem with Shaq Barrett. Do I think that he can contribute to an NFL team? Yep, 100%. Do I think that the New Orleans Saints literally just basically said, we don't really care if we have a starter at that position? They did. So that's kind of like, and if you're talking about a guy being a cap casualty, if he is a cap casualty, does he just go, okay, well, I guess I don't deserve money anymore, and he takes a team-friendly deal? Or is he still going to try to go to a team and make a decent contract? And, again, there's nothing wrong with any of this. If you want Shaq Barrett, I've got no real gripe about it. I mean, there's something to be said about not playing full seasons and all the other stuff, the fact that he's 30 years old, again, like some of these other guys we're talking about. But he's also a guy that put up almost 20 sacks in a season, 2019. And then 2 years ago, he's a 10-sack guy. He's a multiple Pro Bowler. I mean, that matters. So, yeah, if that's a guy that you're looking at, you think that he could fit, cool. My only thing that I would really bring up is, one, the contract situation. Would Shaq Barrett be demanding the high-end type of contract that would get him to become like a cap casualty in Tampa here, if that's the case? And just simply, does he fit Dennis Allen's system? Like, do they have a position for him to come in and play? And I don't know if they do. Now, we've seen that Dennis Allen will put the best players on the field. And I'm not saying that if there was a Shaq Barrett here, Dennis Allen would just ignore him to run his system. But the reason that Caden Ellis and stuff got used is because of injuries. So the system adapted because of problems outside of Dennis Allen's control. When you're building your defense in the offseason, you're just going in hoping that your system is going to be able to be utilized to its highest degree, which means that you're running it how you envision running it. And you're not wanting to have a third linebacker because 15 different players are injured and you're losing multiple starters. So that's my very long-winded way of saying, yeah, Shaq Barrett is fine in terms of, like, do I think that he can contribute to a football team? But for New Orleans, I'm not jumping up and down for it either. And that's just kind of where I'm at. But again, I have no issue with it. The biggest thing for me is just giving, and I know it's kind of cliche, but I really do believe in giving the young guys opportunities to try to develop and get better. The only way to see a lot of that is reps. The only way to do that is opportunity. And the only way to give opportunities and not have other people in the way. So you just drafted a guy at pick 40 that you want to see be that opposite of Cameron Jordan. You've got a guy that you just drafted 3 years ago in Payton Turner who fits the same profile that you want to see be that guy. You got a guy in Carl Granderson who has multiple 5-sack seasons who's trying to earn and prove that he can be more than just a rotational pass rusher. Those young guys get an opportunity first, in my opinion. And if it's not working out, like it looks abysmal, start looking at those veterans and say, hey, look, we need you to come in and contribute to the team while we're trying to develop these young guys. We'll just see what happens after that point. And we wait and see. I will say that I'm not super confident in Payton Turner, but I'm giving him a shot. Same thing I did last offseason. I told y'all, third year is a big year for first, second, and third round picks. This is the year that most of these guys tend to show up, whether they've developed or not. And this is when you get to have an opportunity to properly see if your investment is paid off. You know, Cameron Jordan took 2 years. You know, Trey Henderson took about 3 years. You know, it happens. Now, I realize that when you put a first-round draft grade on a guy, you have an expectation for them to come in and do it quicker. My only rebuttal to that is it's not Payton Turner's fault that the New Orleans Saints put a first-round pick on him, because most analysts would have told you that in terms of ability to play right now, he wasn't ready coming out of college to play at a high level, but he had all the traits to become a high-level player. And New Orleans, just for a while, was really big on just getting these elite trait guys who weren't necessarily amazing in football coming out of college, but they flashed that they could be great. And I think Isaiah is a step a little bit away from that, getting a little bit more proven, but maybe not having the same level of ceiling. So King says, I think DeMarco Jackson has some talent, and I'm all for seeing our young talent develop, but do you think we know their veteran linebacker? I really don't. This team is a team that plays nickel. They play 2 starting linebackers. Would I be opposed to any veteran linebacker coming in? Not at all. But you've got 2 starters in Demario Davis and Pete Warner, 2 very high-end starters in that. And if we want to argue the health thing, cool, bring somebody in. But again, same thing I'm saying with the defensive line. You want to give DeMarco Jackson a chance, Andrew Dow, Nick Anderson out of Tulane, who I love his energy, and the man has got dog in him. Now, dog does not always translate. Adam Big Hill had dog in him, and he just didn't have enough dog to bark at the NFL level, but the dude could bark at the Canadian football level and stuff. But if you're going to bring in, I mean, what veteran are you going to scream? Because I've already had multiple people over the past month saying bring back Quan Alexander, which is fine, I guess. I go back to the same point that I've kind of used ad nauseum now. I want young guys to have an opportunity in June, July, and August. And if it's not working, I pick up a veteran close to the season. And that's cool. And if you get a vet right now, again, 90-man roster, I don't care. Get whoever you want to get right now. Make room. If you do that, then fine. Go ahead and say, hey, Ty Summers, we don't believe in you, man. We picked you up. You were Jacksonville. We don't believe in you right now. Get out of here. Or maybe you say, Anthony Orgy, hey, we don't believe in you, man. Get out. So any of it's fine with me. Ty Summers, by the way, has been in the league like 4 years. Originally with Green Bay, and then he was on IR for like 2 of those years. He ended up being on Jacksonville's practice squad, and we just picked him up. And then Orgy is UDFA, so he's a young guy, but he's also a small guy. He's like 225, 230 pounds. So I don't necessarily know how much he will contribute, but at the same time, I just gave love to Nick Anderson, so I guess it's pretty rude for me to just write off Orgy. But Nick's another guy who went to Tulane, and another guy that loves and reps the boot. So I will admit there are times I have a little bit of bias to the hometown guy. That does happen. He says, get them 2 vets they had last summer. All right. I don't necessarily agree with just like picking random vets from last summer, but I guess my next question would be, which ones are you referring to? Because last year we had Isaiah Pryor and Eric Wilson. I know Eric Wilson was one of them. Who was your second one that you're listing? I mean, cool. I'm down with that, I guess. But Wilson, I mean, yeah, cool. But Eric Wilson's another year older, and if he didn't make the roster last year, what makes us believe that he's gotten better this year? And just so I can look up, Eric Wilson is currently, because he did end up playing with somebody last year, I believe. Yeah, he ended up playing with Green Bay last year. And he is 28, and I believe he's still on the Green Bay Packers. I can confirm this real quick. Sometimes I have to Google. Let's see. Eric Wilson is currently a member of the Green Bay Packers. So, yeah, he is still with the Packers. Played with them last year after not making the New Orleans Saints squad and is still with the team. So, shout out to Eric Wilson. He's 28, so he's not even that old, man. Shout out Eric Wilson. Former, Minnesota Viking? Former Minnesota Viking? But I get it. You want to fill the practice squad. In terms of who I usually go to check practice squad, one, you can just go to Our Lads if you're ever curious what the roster is and you want to see it in, I think, a more palpable format than just going to like the New Orleans Saints website. But I also like John Sigler, who puts out, an updated spreadsheet, seems like every day. And he keeps really on track of OTAs, roster numbers, who's been cut, who's there, who's not. And yeah, he's really good to go to if you're looking for that type of a list. So shout out to John Sig. Do you think this percentage split of touch for AK Williams and Miller is adequate, 50, 30, 20? Honestly, I would say it's too much for AK. I'd probably make that 40, 30, 30. Yeah. But again, I don't even know if Alvin Kamara is going to be suspended, if at all. And maybe Alvin Kamara. I mean, there are times, because we're talking just generally, there are times where Alvin Kamara needs to be 70% of the plays in one particular game. And there are other times where he doesn't need to be the focus. And it just kind of depends on what's going on that particular day, that particular play. I think I'm fine with 50, I guess, but 40 to 50 is kind of where I'm at. For those of you that see Bim just asked where Chris Banjo is, Banjo went to Arizona like 4 years ago, and according to our handy-dandy Google, he was with Arizona last year. I think he is currently a free agent. Or did he go to Denver? No, he went to, I remember. He's a special teams coach with Denver now. Assistant special teams coach. So he actually retired from Arizona so that Sean Payton could hire him in Denver to be an assistant special teams coach. So congratulations to Chris Banjo. I don't think we ever said that on the pod. That's pretty cool, man. That's pretty freaking dope. So shout out to him. That's a nice upward step for him. And yeah, so random name to bring in. Random name. Love it. Who did you? Good to see you. AJ, also good to see you as well. Just go ahead and give y'all a warning. I don't know how much longer my voice has in me. If y'all can't hear, it is a little bit rough today. Having kids is a wonderful experience that you will at times regret because you get sick all the time. Kids are little petri dishes. But Chris Banjo retired from the Arizona Cardinals to become an assistant special teams coach for Sean Payton. And I'm just curious. I'm not trying to start a whole Sean Payton conversation, but for those who are in the chat, I think we got like 50 or 60 people watching the show live here in June, which is so amazing to me, by the way, that y'all this diehard in June. Who is actually going to be following the Denver Broncos this year to see how Sean Payton does? And I'll be honest, even though I'm very upset with Sean Payton for what he did his last year in New Orleans, I want him to be a level successful. Before y'all get mad at me, let me explain why I want him to be a level of successful. Because if he's not successful, I don't want people to diminish what he did in New Orleans, right? And if you diminish Sean Payton, who is literally the name of coaching in New Orleans, then you're diminishing the Saints. And to give you an example of how that's a fact, look at Mora. Mora was the face of New Orleans' best head coach ever. And that dude lives with the stigma of cannot win in the playoffs, could do nothing with New Orleans. And I don't want Payton to struggle, and then that makes people just throw shade at New Orleans. And there's plenty of stuff that people throw shade at New Orleans about already. I don't need to add to the list. So he says, I'm going to be watching the Broncos pretty heavily. I've gotten over what he did at this point. I still haven't really gotten over. I'll be honest. Here's why I haven't gotten over what he did to New Orleans. And what I'm referring to, for those that don't know, is the whole Miami Dolphins thing, where he was basically trying to become a member of the Miami Dolphins the next season, literally the week that New Orleans is playing the damn Miami Dolphins. He's got these backroom meetings going on. The reason I haven't forgiven him is because he's never apologized. It's the same reason that I am still salty, and I'll admit I'm salty, and I'll admit I throw shade, and I'll admit that I could never beat him in a basketball game, even if he had no arms and legs anymore. Anthony Davis. I won't give Anthony Davis any love at all until that man says goodbye and thank you to New Orleans. Until then, he can continue to get lots of shade thrown from the rev tree. And I know I'm not as good of an athlete as him. I'm not even debating any of those things. Man's literally got a baby mama from New Orleans and can't even say, appreciate the city. Goodbye. Thanks for everything. So I'm still salty over the Sean Payton thing. And honestly, that because of that, I probably will be salty about it for the rest of my life because I highly doubt Sean Payton's ever going to come out and be like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. I just don't see him doing it. The man's got too much pride. Maybe like on his deathbed, his dying breath is, admitting, hey, I was wrong. I'm so sorry, New Orleans. And like it's broadcast throughout whatever version of the internet is available then. But I'll admit to chat, to everybody listening to the Who Dat Confessional podcast, that I am a little bit of salt about Sean Payton and what he did the last year in New Orleans, but I still want him to be successful as long as it's not against New Orleans. King says, I watched top 50 plays on Drew Brees earlier, and as amazing as it was to watch, he gave me PTSD because of how bad our defense was during his prime and the blood pressure spikes we suffered. Drew Brees still holds the NFL record for the most fourth quarter comebacks that were blown by his defense. Nobody has broken that record yet, and I don't honestly know if or when that'll happen. And it was a rough time to be a Saints fan. It really was. Really was. I'm very grateful because even in the toughest New Orleans Saints moments, we're getting a little cheesy here, but it's still factual. Even in the toughest New Orleans Saints moments the past few years, we were still worlds better than what they were when I was at my youngest, growing up in the 90s, from what I remember. Keep in mind that I'm 33. Some of the people who listen to the show might be a little bit older, but what my earliest Saints or terrible memories were the end of the 90s. And you had a couple of great years in the 2000s, and the locker room got torn apart. And then Katrina happened, all this. So those are the bad teams I remember. Like, I remember being at the end of the 90s as a kid, and I remember a 3-13 Ditka team and how much everybody was just blasting the ever-loving hell out of New Orleans. I remember 2005 vividly because I was in New Orleans cleaning up after Katrina, and it was abysmal. Now, I realize that you can't expect your football team to be good during such a disaster, but still, I remember those teams. So even at the New Orleans Saints' worst, like 2015 and 2016 and those years, even at their worst, it still wasn't that bad. But, man, it sucks. Bim says, Sean Payton is still a great coach. Never easy to say goodbye. I agree. AJ says, I can't forgive Sean. That was a posturing move from the jump. He didn't have to do it that way. I can't respect it. Completely fine. I mean, I'm basically with you, AJ. Like I said, until he apologizes, it's really tough for me to move on from that. I'm not going to just sit there and talk about it every episode. But as a fan of the game and someone who has devoted thousands of hours to not only working with and for this game, but just watching it as a fan, there's no way for me to respect or forgive that until you solemnly, you earnestly seek to say, hey, look, I screwed up. This was freaking wrong, and I'm sorry. And until that happens, I don't know if I can completely move on for it. I'm not going to sit there and dwell on it. I'm not going to bring it up every episode. But anyway, I just was curious where some of the people in the chat stood. Do you remember the Giants game where Eli and Drew put up 50-plus points? Talk about how bad those defenses played. Positive note, I believe Eli Smoked Turkey Apple played in that game. That is one of the most beautiful shootout games I've ever seen in my life. At the same time, I probably don't ever want to see that game again. As in, would I watch that game again? I'm not saying I wouldn't watch that game again. But what I mean by that is I never want to see the Saints be that team again. For one, and y'all know this, I am a defensive guy. I love defense. So I'm not really rooting for 50-plus point games anyway. That's just me. But when it's that bad, it's not enjoyable to me. But that was back in 2015, and that was in the middle of NOLA is trash. Now keep in mind that Drew threw 7 TDs that game and 2 interceptions. That man was just throwing. I think he threw 50, 55 times that game, and we won 52-49. And not only did we win 52-49, the fourth quarter, the Giants scored 3 touchdowns. So it's one of those we almost blew it type of deals, and that made it even worse because it was a Kai Forbath. I remember this. It was a Kai Forbath field goal because New York actually took the lead. New York had 3 straight touchdowns to start the fourth quarter. They went bam, 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 bam. And then finally the Saints scored with CJ Spiller. And then we got the ball back. Do we have an onside kick and we got the ball back? And y'all really got me wanting to look up that game now. Damn it, King. I got to go look up that game. Like, I remember that. What happened? We got the ball back, but how did we get the ball back? Because I remember we scored that touchdown. There's only like a minute left in the game. All right, I said I'm Googling it. I'm Googling it. Chat, we've officially derailed. We're going through Saints history right now, so strap in. We're about to go to one of the most, like, blood pressure games of all time. All right, let's see. Play Google. We're going to go to Pro Football Reference. If y'all never used it, it's a great resource where you can pull up a lot of this stuff. All right, here we are. I just went by Drew Brees, went to his game logs, and then sorted by games he threw the most touchdowns. All right. So, Sunday, November 1st, 2015, Tom Coughlin versus Sean Payton in New Orleans. So, New Orleans, yes, actually did have the lead at the end of the third with a Ben Watson 20-yard pass from Drew. New Orleans was leading 42-28 before the Giants, led by Eli Manning, 2 Dwayne Harris TD passes, and then Trumaine McBride, 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter, returned an interception for a touchdown. Thanks, Drew Brees. We now no longer have the lead. 36 seconds left in the game. CJ Spiller, a 9-yard pass from Drew. New Orleans ties it with 30 seconds remaining. Oh, my Lanta, what is going on? It's getting crazy. So what happened after that? Well, New Orleans kicked it. Eli Manning would go throw an incomplete deep left pass intended for Reuben Randall. Next play, 30 seconds left on the clock. Eli Manning attempts and completes a short pass to Shane Vereen for 5 yards. Jarris Byrd makes the tackle, and they call their first timeout of the second half. Followed by, on 3rd and 5, Eli Manning has an incomplete pass. Short left intended for Dwayne Harris. Keenan Lewis defending, and New York ends up calling another timeout. Then Brad Wing punts 46 yards, returned by Marcus Murphy for 24 yards, who was then tackled by Craig Dahl. However, Marcus Murphy fumbled, forced by Craig Dahl, recovered by Willie Snead at the New York 47. And then another timeout, and then 5 seconds left on the clock at the New York 32. And I need more of this play. How the hell did we get to the 32? We were at the 47. Oh my goodness, this is wild. And then after a good fumble recovery, positive moving forward, Kai Forbath had a 50-yard field goal. Kai Forbath, ladies and gentlemen, who had 1 season in New Orleans, 10 games in New Orleans. He actually played with 2 different teams in 2015. Kai Forbath was 10 for 15 kicking in that entire season. For New Orleans, he was 9 for 13. That's only 69%. And he made 2 of his 50-yard field goals, and he missed a 20-yarder and like a 35-yarder. So fun, Rev, Deuce, and New Orleans Saints facts going all the way back. All the way back. Where were you when we did all those laterals to get back in the game and then shanked the extra point? That is the, River City Relay. And John Carney was the kicker for that one. Oh, God. Another wonderful moment in New Orleans Saints history. In terms of where was I? I don't know, where was I? Because that was 2003, 2004. Like, there's a chance we were going to make the playoffs that year. And it had already been decided by the time that game was finishing, but we didn't know that as we were watching it. And what was that, 2000? I think it was 2004. Let me check our schedule here. 2004 games and schedule. Let's see. Last game. No, that was Carolina Panthers, so it couldn't have been that season. It must have been 2003. Let's see. 2003, because we did go 8-8 both of those years. All right. Jacksonville Jaguars, week 16, lost 20-19. We would go on to beat the Dallas Cowboys the next week. If we win against Jacksonville and then beat Dallas, we might have actually made the playoffs. But, yep, that is that's exactly what happened. Let me see if I can read the playoff for you for those who are curious. If it goes back that far, I honestly don't know if it does. Let's see if we can bring this game up. Box score, 2003. What a game. All right, we can. So here is the final play. Aaron Brooks, pass complete to Dante Stallworth for 42 yards, touchdown, lateral to Michael Lewis, lateral to Deuce McAllister, lateral to Jerome Payton. And goes 21 yards for the TD, and then John Carney's extra point, no good. No good. So what about some great New Orleans Saints memories that is? What a memory lane trip that is. All right, guys, look, not that I don't want to keep it hanging out with y'all. I really do, but my voice is completely shot. Like, I feel it just going out, and it hurts. So I'm sorry. We're going to have to end a little bit early. We've still got 45 minutes. It's been a great show, and I really appreciate y'all sticking through me with my voice being really jacked up. But we're going to wrap up. Join the Discord if you haven't already. Please like the video as you are on your way out. I appreciate every single one of y'all. I will catch y'all on the next podcast episode. We are going to continue to keep having them all throughout the summer. Who dat? God bless. Love y'all. Deuces. That's me. My ruined Southern Sulty voice is out.